Where did the beacon of positivity go? Is this really this might be the end times? Because without the positivity guy, that means I'm the normal one, which means, I guess as they say, when the cat's away, the mice will play. What the? Oh, come on! Well, to say that the game against the Calgary Flames was particularly a good one before it was over would basically give yourself away as a time traveler, because the way that the game started was absolutely positively just not very good. Obviously, going down one early is never good, and then giving up a 2 spot in the second period while getting one back of your own, you cut the lead in half pretty early on in the second period, ultimately just to have it immediately slashed again just a few minutes later to go down 2. Going into the third period at home against a division rival is obviously not the recipe for success. However, this seems to be the Golden Knights' MO recently, in that being able to take, especially after the All-Star break, games that looked very losable and find a way to get a point, as illustrated with the Chicago Blackhawks game that was a winnable game that was turned into a point, or this game, which obviously it looked like they were in the jaws of defeat, but, come out early, score about 5 minutes into the third period, and then score another goal about 5 minutes after that, hold on for dear life until the end of regulation, and then ultimately, once you've secured the point, which nobody in the Fortress expected you guys to get at that point, you come out, you look really good in overtime. Laurent Brossoit only has to make one save. He looked really good in net the whole night. You can't really peg any of the 3 goals that he gave up throughout this game on him, at least not necessarily. But, later in the overtime, the heady play of Eichel to bait a player out into a line change in the neutral zone, turning a usual 3-on-3 into a 3-on-2. A good feed pass to Marchessault, who just rings it off the crossbar, and me, being the hardened Golden Knights fan that I am, expected that, it's just going to get cleared out. But Alex Pietrangelo, showing his years of experience, drives to the paint, drives to the net, and is able to tuck it in behind Dan Vladar and give the Golden Knights a good come-from-behind win at the Fortress. Now, that's another win. The Golden Knights look really good after the All-Star break. That's another point. That's another 2 points. 2 huge standings points given the happenings in the NHL when it comes to the LA Kings, Seattle Kraken, and the Edmonton Oilers, and their ability to win and or lose games on any given night. You never really know. And so the ability for them to bank points out of a situation where it looked like they were going to get none is obviously very, very, very good. It seemed like this game against the Dallas Stars was going to go very similar to how the game went against the Calgary Flames, except this time it was a matter of which goalie was going to blink first. Obviously, the first period was an absolute, just insane showing of goaltending. The entire game as a whole was just an insane showing, and ultimately it was probably one of the best games in the NHL on that night, and possibly one of the Golden Knights games of the year in terms of both sides of the game playing incredibly well. Obviously, with Michael Amadio scoring first, it was really good, and then just to have Johnston come down and score a few minutes later for the Dallas Stars didn't feel very good, going in 1-0, or going in 1-1. And then there was a moment where I thought the game was going to be over when, Laurent Brossoit was under siege and he was making save after save after save. And there was the assumption that we were not going to score on Jake Ottinger again. Well, fortunately, one of those assumptions was wrong, as Jack Eichel late in the third period takes a pass up the near boards and is able to go forehand, backhand, sweet, sick mitts on that guy right around Ottinger for what I thought in the moment was going to be the game-winning goal. Now, with the benefit of doing this a couple of days later, we know that's not what happened, as with the seconds ticking down, puck is cleared out into the neutral zone. Chandler Stevenson catches it, doesn't quite receive the pass cleanly, goes to chase it down along with Robertson. Robertson just sells out, blocks it with the very toe of his skate, and about 15 seconds later, and one shot that they did review to make sure it didn't touch the net. I still think it went out of play, but there wasn't a conclusive angle, so I get it. Ultimately, Rope Hint scores to tie the game on just a schnipe. No way Laurent Brossoit could see it. No way that it was even going to be stopped, even if he could. It was a really good shot. And ultimately, That makes it 2-2. Golden Knights get a point in a game that they should have won in regulation. That's 2 games out of 3 that's happened. But obviously, there's still overtime. Now, the Golden Knights were under siege for the entirety of overtime. There was both chances, both way. And probably the highlight of the game was Laurent Brossoit's Save of the Year candidate, which I think can be best summed up by just describing what he did, which is hold on. And so with his Save of the Year candidate in his back pocket, Golden Knights continue to press, but ultimately they don't get to score. Now, I'm a fan of the shootout. I've always liked the shootout. When I was playing back when I was younger as a goalie, I loved the shootout because I would win all my shootouts. But I'm going to stand on the side of the NHL players on this one and say that this game had no business going to a shootout because it just ruined what was an incredible hockey game. There was incredible goaltending, incredible offense, incredible defense. And to have a game of that magnitude decided by a skills competition, that's not great for the game. Like, I get it. I understand it's the rules, and I know I'm a bitter fan because the Golden Knights did lose the shootout 2-0, never even really getting an opportunity. It's not really the way that these games need to go. This game had so many storylines in it. You know, Brossoit's save in the overtime, the comeback by Dallas in regulation, Jake Ottinger being Jake Ottinger, and living in the Golden Knights' heads rent-free. There were so many storylines that could have been explored in this game if the overtime was 10 minutes long, not if the overtime was 5 minutes long. So I'm still on the fence about whether they should make that change, but especially after this game against Dallas, I'm all for 10-minute overtime. Shootouts they're fun to watch, but they're not. They will never match the drama of a well-contested overtime like the previous 5 minutes of hockey was. And so, I'm all for a fair deciding of the game. I want the games to be decided fairly. I want the points to be divvied out how they're supposed to be. But the made-for-TV aspect of this overtime, the saves, the stories, the players, there was a moment there, and it just wasn't able to happen. But ultimately, the Golden Knights lose in the shootout, which kind of stinks. It's a winnable game they should have gotten 2 points out of. They only got 1 point out of. The best thing that happened was the LA Kings, Seattle Kraken, and the Edmonton Oilers all lost on that night. So, I mean, you pick up a point, everybody else loses a point, or you pick up a point on everybody else, except for Dallas, who gains 1 point in the race for the Western Conference Championship, even though I've got to assume that Colorado is going to wind up finding a way to win that because they haven't lost since, January. But that's not the point. So who do we have next up on the calendar? Let me look. Colorado. God dang it. Hey guys, it's Ian reporting here from my corner, doing a Kevin Weeks style trade announcement because we have a trade to announce. The Golden Knights acquire forward Ivan Barbashev from the St. Louis Blues in exchange for a first-round pick from a 20-something draft. I don't even know. We've traded away so many first-round picks at this point. Traded away Zach Dean. We're going to see how this trade plans out. So yeah, this was an interesting weekend with all the big names flying around, especially in their relations to the Golden Knights, especially with it being reported around on names like Patrick Kane, Timo Meier. There was the expectation that we'd make a big splash. And no offense to Ivan Barbashev, he's definitely a big splash, but he wasn't the biggest fish in the pond. And as a Knights fan, I'm almost used to always getting the biggest fish in the offseason or the trade deadline. Names that come to mind: Max Pacioretty, Mark Stone, Robin Lehner, Evgeny Dodonov, Alex Pietrangelo, Alec Martinez. The list goes on and on and on. So the fact that we were in on Timo Meier allegedly, but given what the New Jersey Devils paid to acquire Timo Meier, holy moly, may as well give them the key to the castle while they're at it. This was definitely a good move for the Golden Knights, and it was also a good move in a way for Zach Dean. Now, I know there's the stigma that he's a first round pick, and we as an organization have never been very good at holding on to our first round picks. Think Brandstrom, Suzuki, Krebs, Glass, the list goes on. Now add Dean to that list. We've traded away 5 of our 6 now first-round picks. The only one we're keeping is Brendan Brisson, who has been putting up decent numbers in the American Hockey League, so I was going to assume a deal for him was a non-starter. But I digress. The fact of the matter is, Ivan Barbashev fills a need. Nick Waugh's out day-to-day. Mark Stone's out for the foreseeable future. Ivan Barbashev is one of the few players who was on the block for this trade deadline that we could actually reasonably hang on to going on into the future, given our current cap construction. We've got Logan Thompson as our 1A goalie. We've got a goalie contest going on between Aiden Hill and Laurent Brossoit. That's kind of complicated with Hill's injury up until to the point this trade was made, and Thompson's long-term injury. So much so that the Golden Knights are still on names like Cam Talbot, which would be a crazy trade, but also mark the end of the Thompson era. So I'm not going to put the cart before the horse on that one. He's a good player. Barbashev brings some grit. He brings some scoring. He's a relatively talented player. So there's really no way to complain about the deal unless you're on hockey Twitter, you're a keyboard warrior and say, oh, they never hold on to their first round picks. We're weaponizing our assets. And in terms of the player that we got, that we traded the other way, Zach Dean's put up decent numbers in Henderson, but the fact of the matter is it didn't look like he was developing within our system very well. And, nothing against the guy. He seems like a perfectly good guy, a perfectly good player, but he just wasn't working his way up the depth chart the way that was expected. Names above him include Jonas Ronbjerg, Byron Frazee, Paul Cotter, and I assume Ivan Morozov, Sakari Mannanen, and Brendan Brisson all sit above him on the Golden Knights call-up list. And that's already, and he was part of a very stacked forward core in, playing for the HSK at this point already. So this seems like a good trade for both organization and individual. The St. Louis Blues get a guy with good draft pedigree and decent scoring, and the Golden Knights get a player that they can plug right into their lineup right away to get some relief in terms of injuries and also some reliability in terms of NHL experience and familiarity. He played with players like Keegan Colasar in the American Hockey League. He played with Alex Pietrangelo in the NHL. And so there's that familiarity with some players on our roster already. So it's not a bad trade. I'd say it's a good trade for the Golden Knights, and they still have cap space that they can weaponize if they want to, either go after another depth player or go after a goalie, even though I think that's a terrible idea, or be the middleman on deals that include, to help teams acquire a player and in exchange for like a draft pick. So we've got this cap space we can turn into draft capital by retaining salary. So it'll be an interesting last week before the deadline, which is coming up very, very soon. I'm recording this on a Tuesday. I believe the deadline is Friday. So there will be more moves made by the Golden Knights probably. But this was definitely the one that everybody was waiting on. Barbashev has been linked to the Golden Knights since the very beginning, since it was obvious the Blues were going to sell house. And it's good to see that this trade came to fruition, and it didn't cost the Golden Knights a lot. All it did really was cost a player that was likely never going to crack the NHL roster, or at least not be a considered player for the NHL for the next 3 or 4 years. Good for team, good for player, and Barbashev gets to make his NHL or Golden Knights debut against the team that knocked his old team out of the playoffs last year. I wonder if that'll bring him any motivation. Oy. Yeah, no, that wasn't good. The Golden Knights haven't had many burn-the-tape games this year. That was a burn-the-tape game. They've only been shut out once. It was by the Dallas Stars and Jake Ottinger back in January or something. It was not a good game. And, given the way the Golden Knights were playing, an 8 or 9 game point streak going in, dating back to just before the All-Star break, playing some of the best hockey of the year, Colorado Avalanche still have some injured players. I think Cale Makar wasn't in the lineup. Landeskog is still complicated. And Colorado, sure, they've been hot recently. They've won 6 in a row going into this game or something. And so they're a force to be reckoned with. But that's not how I expected that game to go. Second goal was not great. And the empty netter at the end of the game to put them away, making it 3-0, wasn't great either. Ivan Barbashev played okay, but he played like he hadn't practiced with the Golden Knights really much. So the whole team was off, and I've got a theory as to why the game was off. And my theory stems around something that happened about 13, 14 seconds into the game and involved, the most dangerous player on the ice in the form of Aiden Hill. Say it with me, class. If you're a goaltender, tend the goal. So yeah, 1-1-1 over a long weekend series, a game Thursday, Saturday, and Monday. It's not terrible. The Golden Knights have dropped one game in regulation since the All-Star break. That's a pretty good number. And the important thing is when we've been dropping points, whether it be, the overtime shootout loss to Chicago that I covered in the last video, whether it be the shootout loss to Dallas or the regulation loss to the Colorado Avalanche, what has been critical throughout this whole thing is that the teams around the Golden Knights in terms of standings in the Pacific Division in particular have been backsliding a little bit. The Edmonton Oilers have been struggling. The LA Kings have lost a few in a row. The Seattle Kraken have lost a few in a row. So ultimately, while it's not the situation the Knights would like to be in right now, it's not exactly DEFCON 0 either. They've got the VGK have games in hand over the Kings who are directly chasing them. They've got the same number of games as the Oilers who sit in third, and the Kraken are slowly starting to run out of steam right now. Like, they're the first wild card right now, and I think they're one losing streak away from being out of the playoffs in terms because the Calgary Flames are still trying really, really hard to get into the playoffs. So the race for the Pacific Division crown is going to be tight down the stretch. There's still plenty of games left to go, so there's a lot left to happen. What gives me a little bit of confidence by comparison to last year is that, Gary Lawless, VGK Insider, says we're about 18 points away from being comfortable, from making the playoffs. So that's 9 wins. There's still 20-something games left. So that's a reasonable margin. It's like 24, 25 games left. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so saying you have to win less than half of your games down the stretch to make the playoffs, that makes you feel okay. But as much as I appreciate Gary's commentary, and he's often right about things like this, I have the number sitting a little bit closer to 24 points. I'd say they'd probably have to go 500 for the rest of the regular season to comfortably make the playoffs. But this is a team, given their roster construction, and I know injuries at the goaltending position have been brutal, and I know Mark Stone is still a long way away, but this is a team that's built to try and win divisions, to try and win the Western Conference, and ultimately the goal is to win the Stanley Cup. Now, I know that's hard because it's, the last days of February to be thinking about what's going to happen in April, but there's 1 month left of the regular season, month plus a little bit. Golden Knights are going to have to play one of their best months to hold on to the Pacific Division and try and hold on to the Western Conference. And just whatever they do not have a repeat of what happened this time of the year last year. The last thing the Golden Knights need is a 5-game losing streak like they had, and that was the nail in the coffin for them last year. If they're able to keep the forward momentum, maybe get Logan Thompson back in the coming weeks, maybe get Mark Stone back before the end of the season, it's going to be a sprint to the finish. The NHL season is a marathon, but this is going to be a sprint. Oilers are really good. The Kings are really good. The Kraken are really good. The Golden Knights are really good. And anything can happen in hockey. One bad week, and you can go from first place to fourth place, just like that. So time will tell. I'm very happy with the way the Knights have come out of the All-Star break. I'm very happy with their record. I would love to have had those 2 extra points that you lost to both Dallas and Chicago, blowing late leads and losing in a shootout. But at the end of the day, beggars can't be choosers, and points are points. They've captured points in games that they would have otherwise last year at this time lost. So I feel a little bit better, but we're not quite to the point where I can exhale. It's been a very good season with some very bad stretches, and I worry about one of those bad stretches cropping up at the worst possible time, which would be like this week. The Golden Knights have the hardest schedule in the Western Conference from here on out. They have to play basically everybody who's in the playoffs in both conferences between now and the end of the regular season, including a couple series against the Minnesota Wild and the Edmonton Oilers, Seattle Kraken, teams that are chasing the Golden Knights in standings positions. So the last couple of games, the last 20 some odd games are going to be very exciting. They're going to be very stressful. And
they're going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot of storylines. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I'm really nervous, but I'm not scared. I feel good. I feel confident. I think every fan should feel relatively confident that the Golden Knights will enter March in first place in the Pacific Division more likely than not. I haven't looked at who plays when, but they just got to win the games they're supposed to win a couple of the games they're not supposed to win, and get points in the games they're expected to at least get a point in. And if they do all that, everything will be fine, and we're going to have some playoff hockey this year because I missed it last year. That being said, that's enough rambling. This was only 3 games plus 1 trade, which was a pretty good trade, and there will be plenty more rambling to happen. I don't think the Golden Knights are done for the deadline. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lower move, maybe a player in, player out. Who knows? I know Kelly McCrimmon and George McPhee have some crazy plans up there. They always do. And there's still a couple players out there that would like to move. The list is getting shorter and shorter, but there's still time to see. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks again. I don't even know. I've been getting a lot more views than I've been expecting, and so I'm very appreciative of this, of everybody who watches. I've gained some subscribers, which has been awesome. I really enjoy sitting down and talking to you guys, even though my uploading hasn't been as consistent as I'd liked it to be. Life is complicated, school is really hard and really time-consuming, and so trying to find that balance has been a little bit complicated, especially with having to sit down, record, and edit. Bad excuses. I'm trying to do better. At least I'm not going radio silence for 2 months like I did back in November, December, and the start of January. I'm trying, guys. Stick with me. I appreciate you guys so very much, and I hope you guys will stick with me. This is going to be an awesome journey down the stretch and hopefully into the playoffs. That being said, thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.